On the hunt for my next luxury watch, it's impossible to ignore Rolex. And while most of their models are way out of reach for many of us, not all are. And while the majority focuses on the heavy hitters, the Submariners, Daytonas and GMTs, in this third episode I will have a look at arguably the most quintessential Rolex. The one Rolex model that combined the two major advancements and made Rolex the luxury sports watch brand. This watch is also the reason why virtually every Rolex that you find today has the words Oyster and Perpetual on the dial. I'm of course talking about Rolex's Oyster Perpetual, so let's have a look. Welcome back to the channel and to this third episode of this series where I look at 4 different contenders for my next luxury watch. If you want to keep following this series, then don't forget to subscribe and also check out the other videos after you watch this one. Why exactly the Oyster Perpetual? Why this Rolex? Well, it's pretty simple. First of all, it is the entry-level Rolex. Second of all, even though it's the lowest part of Rolex's catalog, it was and still is a very significant watch for the brand. Third of all, this is one Rolex that you can actually buy second-hand without paying a stupid premium. You can find many Oyster Perpetuals on the secondary market for around, at the end of 4,000 euros and more likely between 5,000 and 6,000 euros, which is the MSRP right now for a new Oyster Perpetual, albeit for a 2016 model, but still much more affordable than any other Rolex watch today. Rolex definitely makes the most desirable sports watches today. Ranging across different model lines from chronographs to GMTs, they are outright defining what a luxury sports watch is. The main characteristics of a sports watch we see today is sturdy build quality, a legible dial, water resistance and the automatic winding mechanism. And this is exactly what Rolex put out in 1933 under the name of the Oyster Perpetual. It combined the revolutionary Oyster case, which brought some water resistance to wristwatches, not the first one to be correct, but on top of that they also added the circular rotating weight in the automatic winding system. And these two key aspects of sports watches is what Rolex defined back in 1933 and which they still live by. The Rolex Oyster Perpetual perfectly fits into what I am looking for my next watch. It is a very sturdily built watch, a quality built watch, and it is a time only watch. No fuss on the dial, 3 hands and indices, and that's it, putting nothing in between you and telling the time. Rolex is well known for their build quality and their reliable movements, which seem to be everlasting, as well as years and even decades of focused refinement. If you know Rolex only for a few years or a few decades, you know that Rolex is not a brand that happily experiments with outrageous things. Instead, what Rolex likes to do and has been doing for the last few decades is putting their trust in models that they know people like and just refining the crap out of them. And these decades of small refinements and manipulations of the case size and the proportions gives the watches Rolex offers a feelable refinement on your wrist. So of course we have to kind of put this in reference with the other contenders that we have. So the first one was the Black Bay 36 and the second one the Breitling Chronomat. And of course the Rolex Oyster Perpetual is yet again a more expensive option. So what do you get for these extra few thousand euros? Well, to put it simply, you get a Rolex and everything that comes with it. You have a superlative chronometer, which means your watch will run no worse than -2 +2 seconds a day. You have impeccable build quality inside and out, from the bracelet over the clasp into the movement. You have a wrist feel that is unmatched by most other luxury brands. Interacting with the build elements of a Rolex is just a pleasure. Winding the watch is a pleasure. Opening and closing the clasp just feels amazing. You get a sense that the watch you have is a do-it-all watch. And this really is a watch you can wear every day. No matter the activity, the watch will excel at it. If I were to buy this watch, I would again go for the 36mm version, just like with the Black Bay and the Chronomat. I just think 36mm is a very comfortable size for these types of sports watches, and I just love the look of them, the feel of them and everything. I would go with the versions that have the previous 3130 movement, a very widely used Rolex movement over decades. They have used them in the Submariner, the Air King, the Explorer and also the Oyster Perpetual. And this shows that Rolex really has confidence in this movement, both with its accuracy and longevity. Of course, the newer Oyster Perpetuals with the 3 to 30 movement would be very nice to have, especially with the bumped up power reserve of 70 hours in the new ones compared to 48 in the older ones. But the hype, especially around the more colored versions of the new Oyster Perpetual, is just crazy, just like with most other Rolex watches. So this is unfortunately not an option. I'm not entirely sure about which dial color or which indices I would go for. I really like the simple lume-filled baton indices, and some colors that I like is the white and black, of course, the rhodium gray dial and also the blue in this case. But I have to say, even though I'm not a Rolex fanboy by any stretch of the imagination, owning one of Rolex's models was always kind of on the plan for me. You know, as a milestone from a brand that is most associated with watches, the biggest and seemingly best watchmaker in the world today. And while I don't agree with these things, especially that Rolex is supposed to be the best watchmaker in the world, it has this kind of status in the industry. But given the price point and this whole sort of milestone that is associated with your first Rolex, it might not yet fit into my life and my collection. Maybe a Rolex Oyster Perpetual would be just that stretch too far, too early in my collection. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Would you get this watch if you were in my position, or when would you recommend buying your first Rolex watch or your first luxury watch in general? Let's get talking in the comments down below. And with that, I hope you enjoyed the video and this third episode. Stay tuned for more content and the fourth and last episode of this series, and check out video 1 and 2 on our channel. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like all of our videos while you're at it, and see you next time. Ciao.